Oh, I sent you an email right around 9 o'clock this morning with the Turnitin info. Turnitin.com, if you're not familiar, it's a website we're going to use for our major assignments. So rough drafts and, more importantly, final drafts are going to be turned in there, hence the name, Turnitin. All you got to do, you go to Turnitin.com, you set up an account, or you may have one already, and then you join our class, okay? And when you click on that, to do that, you're going to need 2 pieces of information. Those 2 pieces of information are in the email I sent you. You have the class ID, which is a string of numbers, and you have the password, which is one word, man stuff. I thought it was silly, I thought it was memorable, but you use that to sign up for our class. That's how you're going to turn in those major assignments. You need to do that. If you don't turn in papers, I mean, honestly, what are we doing, right? Okay. Anything else I want to go over before we... I think that's it for now. Yeah. Okay. To begin class, I sent you guys an email over the weekend. If you would please find that. It's student example for Monday's class, I believe is the subject heading. In there, you have the first of many, for good or ill, student examples I will use this semester. I mentioned at some point I have a creative writing background, so I'm a big fan of workshop, of like looking at each other's stuff, kind of using that to help us think about our own stuff. So what are you going to be looking at? Well, number one, this is a fellow student's work, so we want to be respectful. I have no reason to think you guys won't be, but I always like to start with that. Let's be respectful of each other, right? Not trying to call anybody out. Number two, though, this is also anonymous. There's no names on this stuff, so there's no reason to know who it is. If, over the course of the semester, we look at some work and you open it and you're like, oh, shit, that's me. It's all good. As long as you don't say that, no one has any reason to know that it's you, right? So if you're the kind that's like, oh my God, just keep it to yourself. And look, this semester we're all masked. No one can tell, right? Unless they're like reading your eyebrows. So keep it to yourself. It'll remain anonymous. We'll move right past it. It's all good, okay? All right. Hopefully you've had time to pull it up. What are we looking at? Well, you've only given me one thing, so it is that. This is the homework we turned in for Saturday, hopefully. It's an explication of Little Boy. This student has some interesting ideas that I want to talk about. And basically, I'm just going to give you one direction. And we're going to start with that. Well, 2, technically. First thing you got to do is read it. That's the first one. Number 2, though, I think primarily there are 2 ideas in this student example. 2 themes, 2 things from Little Boy that they really want to talk about. One of them is easy. I think all of you are going to spot the first one pretty easily, okay? The second one is a little more difficult. It's not quite as explicit, but I want you to do your best. I want you to see what you can find, all right? So read over the student example. You're looking for 2 big ideas we're going to talk about. Take a minute. All right. Let's talk about it. So, to begin with, as I said, one of the ideas is pretty explicit. What's one of their big ideas? One of the things they keep coming back to when they're thinking about this poem, Little Boy. They keep wanting to talk about this one thing. Sure. But that's kind of, yes, but that's tied into like a larger theme, right? Like something we're thinking about throughout the poem. Like, I guess one way you can think of it is like, how does that bombing affect, or how does it tie into this theme, whatever it is we're doing? It's a question they keep coming back to in different ways. And we talk about this when we talk about the poem anyway. Like Little Boy, a lot of it has to do with what? Yes?
I'm going to say like innocence.
Yeah. They talk about it here in the example. And we talk about the poem. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to talk about the poem Little Boy and not in some way touch upon this question of innocence, right? That is, in some ways, a big part of what that poem is about. It's about that little boy. Eventually he grows up, thinks about when he was more innocent versus where he is now, right? So absolutely, the student example in front of you is thinking about that. That's one of the big ideas. And the bombing may tie into it. More on that later. Second thing. This is a little harder to sort out. And I want to see if you guys can do it. And if not, then I'll get us there. But could you sort out, this one isn't as explicit, as I said. But another theme they keep kind of coming back to, the one hint I can give you, and I'm sorry this feels like a scavenger hunt, but the hint I can give you is like, they make a couple assumptions at various points. Like the first time I read it, it kind of took me aback. I was like, what? And then I thought about it a little bit, and I was like, I think I see where this person is coming from. But they make specifically two, at first glance, just weird assumptions. Yeah.
Well, are you talking about like the whole "this is a true American" thing?
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So even, I mean, you can think about how we talk about poems a little bit. It's almost like an alarm bells. You're like, what? Like you should notice it. You may not have a reading of it yet, but even on a first read, you're like, that's a weird thing to say. Yeah, that is one of them. Can anybody find the other one? Again, I'm sorry it feels like a scavenger hunt. But they have another moment where it's like, what? Type of thing. And again, I'll give you a hint. They're talking about the porch. Families on the porch. Okay, it's all good. All right. To begin with, what we're talking about up front, it's actually near the front of the selection. The student writes, he, meaning the boy, referenced DiMaggio and Mantle, letting me know again that he was a true American. And we'll kind of start there. You said that was strange. Why? Why that strike you as odd?
Well, for starters, what does that even mean?
What does that mean? They don't spell it out here. And again, this is homework. This is the big reason I want you to do this stuff is half the time you don't really know what you think, right? It's kind of in the murk of your own thoughts. It's kind of hidden somewhere in there. But to me, for this person to say that, there's a decent chance that they mean something by that. Especially because, again, I think they come back to it later. Do you guys have any ideas? It's not on the page, okay? They don't explain it. But when they say, the boy references DiMaggio and Mantle, letting me know again that he was a true American, what might they mean by that, do you think? First of all, who are DiMaggio and Mantle?
Baseball players?
Very famous baseball players. Hall of Fame, greatest of all time, baseball players. Okay. So what? What does it have to do with a true American? Yeah, what's up?
Is baseball not an American game?
It is. I like how both of you are like, every sentence you guys say about baseball, by the way, has had a question mark on it.
I don't know much about baseball.
I don't either. It's because it's 2020 and like 3 people watch baseball. I'm not trying to, but it's true. It's pretty true.
I mean, like at the time, like
Exactly.
when the film was set,
Exactly.
wasn't it like America's favorite pastime?
Exactly. It still has that name, America's pastime. Like, its time seems to have passed actually by this point. But this is 1945 thereabouts. We get that date right. Baseball is a big deal. Okay, so these guys are a big deal. And it is America's pastime. So there already we have some kind of tie-in with this question of true American. Part of our issue might be that phrasing, because we're like, what does that mean? But still, there's something about the game of baseball, what it represents in this world to these people, right? And I think our student author here has kind of picked up on that a little bit. Possibly, right? This question of like true American, whatever that might be. So maybe we got something. Yes, ma'am.
I mean, we could go into like, because they're talking about the bombing,
Yeah.
how like they treated Japanese Americans.
Oh, like, are you trying like internment camps?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that goes back to like the whole, what is a true American? Those were Americans.
Okay, I got you. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't quite. Yes, I mean, yes and no. So, like, for instance, you have to be careful how far you took it. Like, we don't talk about internment camps in the poem, right? So you couldn't take it that far. But, yeah, there is a question. And actually, that brings me to the second one. So we'll sidebar for a minute, but yes. The second thing that stood out to me, and I think it's along the same lines, it's about halfway through, the student says, I began to picture a young boy spinning the wheels of his bicycle and his father sitting on the front porch with the mother pouring lemonade. Now, you could easily just pass over that, but we do not talk about lemonade in the poem, right? So again, that's an assumption the student has, but I don't think it's totally unfounded. Now, first of all, the rest of that sentence, that is the scene. I mean, I don't know that we really mentioned a front porch, but it's a boy, it's his father. There is a bicycle there that I guess maybe the boy might be spinning the wheels. The father is sitting in a chair, right? And we read it one kind of way, and that's intensely, right? It's an intense scene. The boy asks a question that he doesn't realize is a bigger deal than it is, right? The father reacts in the way that he does. So everything that we get about the scene is kind of through those emotions, right? If you take a step back at any point, it's also this, except for the lemonade. And that's what was interesting to me. Again, I would say our student author here is expressing a kind of assumption, but I don't know that it's totally wrong. What kind of scene are they painting for us here? With the boy and the dad on the porch, the mom comes out like, it's a pitcher of lemonade, right? It's even got lemon slices in it, maybe. It's like she's got an apron on. Like, can you see it? Like, what is that? What are we trying to talk about here, do you think? With that scene. Another way to think of it, where do you see that scene take place? Huh? Okay. Well, a bigger question I could ask, who lives like that?
I was thinking maybe they were trying to like refer back to the true American
Sure.
look.
I think so. So now my question is, and again, we are working with like two sentences, two assumptions this student makes. We are not in their brain. But they give us some important information here. Who is according to the student, in this poem, a true American? How are they trying to define that, do you think?
Like the old school stereotypes.
Yeah, like what?
Like for instance, like liking baseball and having like a mom and a dad.
Uh-huh.
The mom like does like the house stuff.
Kind of short, curly hair type of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like the apron and...
Yeah. Like Leave It to Beaver,
Yeah.
white folks, middle America. That's what we're talking about, right? And again, just so we're clear, we're not saying that is everybody or that is really America, but it is this traditional, quote-unquote, stereotypical depiction of America that we've had for many, many years, right? Just like baseball. Okay, so that's kind of cool. It's not, and I want to be very clear, the other theme, the other idea that's kind of rolling through this at various points isn't America necessarily how we think of it, especially not in 2020, because that's not in the poem. And it's not even like America, like where we are right now, right? That's not, it's the idea of it. It's this maybe even unattainable, I don't know, but this like notion of capital A America we kind of have in our heads somewhere, right, for some reason. That's what we're kind of talking about, I think. Okay? Now, why do I point this out to you? What I want to do today, and I meant to start with this, but as you see, I'm as organized as I can be. This is kind of a nuts and bolts day. What I want to do is I want to try to help show you how we can take something like the homework we did and use it to bridge to, say, the next homework assignment. And if you can do that, and if you can do that between homework assignments, all of a sudden you're building eventually to the paper, right? That's what we're trying to do. So, in our example, we talk about some other things here and there, but I think, in large part, we're definitely talking about innocence and kind of how it works. And we're also thinking about this idea of America and whatever that is. We don't explore it super fully. It is just homework. But those ideas are there. So that tells me this student is thinking about this some kind of way. Well, now we can think about the homework assignment for next time. If I'm this student and I'm faced with the homework assignment, which I am going to talk about what it is, okay, I would view it as an opportunity. Just like I told you, I'm not in the business of assigning busy work. I don't want to look at all your stuff just for fun. You don't want to do it just for fun, right? So whenever possible, you want to try to use it for you. If I'm the student and I'm thinking about little boy already, and I got some thoughts already, like some real ideas, I'll try to apply that. I'll try to carry that forward maybe. So for instance, first a caveat. I told you already, but I want to reiterate, we're doing research throughout the class at various points, mostly for units 2 and 3, okay? That's going to be, in large part, scholarly research. We'll talk about that when we get there. Don't worry about it too much, okay? For this unit, and for this one homework assignment, we're going to dip our toe into research. It's going to be low intensity, okay? Not super high stakes. And it's not going to be in your paper, right? But if you actually attempt it and like sort of give it an honest go, it can help you think about your papers down the line. So what do I mean by that? Well, for those later papers that we're not worried about right now, we're not going to use Google. Not much anyway. But for this assignment, you can. And more to the point, I think you should. And I'm going to show you why. So, if I'm this student, and say I'm thinking about little boy, and say I've kind of taken a step back, I've looked at the work I've already done, and I say, okay, I am thinking about this. I don't know what I really think about it, but I am thinking about this stuff. Maybe I'll go look it up, just to see what I can find, see what other people have said. Maybe that gets me thinking some more, right? To begin with, I just type in innocence. Now, that's a huge idea, and as you've noticed, especially when you type in one word like that, it's just an idea, you're going to get a lot of just definitions. And the best part is, and I think this says a lot about us, again, as a culture, the number one definition these days is that you haven't committed a crime. That's not actually the true definition. The true definition is number 2. Just that you're pure. You're not corrupt. But that's the second definition these days, because, well, that's a different class. But, all right. So we all kind of know what innocence means. That's not really helping us. Well, let's bring in the other thing. Innocence and America. We'll just see. Now, I teach a class before you, so the game is kind of given away a little bit. I assume we all know how links work these days, right? Because that one's purple. But, I mean, check it out. The first step in any research, this will be true later in the semester as well, you just look at the titles. Some of these sound, a lot of these sound like they might be in our ballpark, right? Unlearning the Myth of American Innocence. We're going to click on it, right? Again, spoilers, it's purple. Okay, but even some of these other ones, American Innocence Reconsidered, America's Innocence, a bunch of American Innocence, blah, 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 blah. If I'm this student, I still don't necessarily know what these ideas have to do with each other, but it seems like on Google anyway. Somebody does. Somebody has ideas. So I'll just go and look them up, right? I'll just see what's going on. In this first one, I'm going to open it up. A couple notes. So already, you see part of the issue with a popular source, right? Google's going to spit out mostly popular sources. A couple notes. Number one, this is The Guardian, which I'll tell you right now is actually super reputable, right? It's like an older school publication. I just closed a little banner ad down here asking for money because they don't have paywalls, but they also don't make any money because they actually publish news, right? So that usually tells you it's not the worst website in terms of reputation. You can look up sources, like I could do another search, how biased is The Guardian, how reputable is The Guardian. The trouble with those searches, I'm not saying you shouldn't do them if you're not sure, but the trouble with those searches is you also have to think about the results of that search, because a lot of those folks will be biased too. 2020 is a weird time to be alive. All that out of the way. Again, as I said, you'll notice when we click on this popular source, it's a picture of a lady looking real somber next to a guy selling food. It's like, what on earth is this about? What does it have to do with anything? It doesn't. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. So we got a lot of window dressing we got to get past. We scroll down. Apparently her name is Susie. Okay. Hi, Susie. I want you to see something first. And I'm not trying to freak you out, but that's where the article starts. And we're just going to go. And there's some pictures, but like, man, it's kind of long. It's kind of real. It just keeps going, man. Good God. Susie had a lot to say, okay? So here's what I'm saying. Hi, Susie. The most important lesson you have to learn, and the sooner you learn it as a student, the better for you, I promise you, is how to constructively skim. Okay? All of you, to some degree, I think that you're pretty good skimmers. And we're not going to talk about why you think that is. Mostly it's to do with the fact that you do it all the time, probably. Especially when it comes to reading for class. But pretty much all of you are actually really bad at skimming. And here's why. You know you haven't skimmed well when you get to class or the like. And you have to talk about it, and you're lost. Or you're not sure. Or you don't remember. That means you're not skimming right, correctly. The way to skim is probably a little slower than what you're doing now, at least to begin with. You practice, you get better. But you learn to pick up on important bits of information. Now, why am I, as a teacher, telling you to skim material? I'm not saying to do that with poems, by the way. I just showed you how long this article was. What do you do if you read this entire article and you get to the end and you're like, that didn't help me at all?
You have to forget stuff as you go along.
Well, there's that. But what I'm more worried about than that, I mean, first of all, I would say take some notes. But what I'm worried about is you're wasting your time. This is a single homework assignment on a set of ideas that are in a poem that at the end of the day, you may not use for your paper. Not all of us are going to write our papers on whatever we do this homework on, right? This is all practice. It's all just figuring stuff out. But Body and Soul, we're going to talk about at one point. We're going to read another poem later on. Like, you might change your mind. You might have other ideas. You might not write about this. But if you get to the end of this article, long as it is, and you realize it's not going to help you, well, now you got to go find another article. You just wasted all that time. That's what constructive skimming is for, okay? And I'm not going to tell you everything about it today, but I'm going to introduce the idea to you. And there's a couple really easy things you can do to begin with. Number one, especially with popular sources like this, like pretty much everything you're going to find when you Google something, they're going to start with a hook. Just like you were probably taught with introductions in some way, right? You want to hook in the reader. They're going to do the same thing. This article starts. My mother recently found piles of my notebooks. Immediately, I know I'm skipping that whole paragraph. It's not long, but it's long enough. I saved myself that time. I do not give a shit about Susie and her notebooks. I don't. I know it's going to tie in somehow, but I know that already. So I'm just going to try to get to her actual point. Second paragraph. When I left my small hometown for college, Susie, I still don't care. Okay? We'll keep moving. She's talking about Turkey and Istanbul. Okay. Well, that's not strictly about Susie, so now we're getting to something. Next paragraph. For all their patriotism, Americans rarely... Okay, all right. Now we're to her point. We're 1.5 paragraphs deep, but we're finally getting to whatever her point was. So now I'm probably going to slow down a little bit more. I'm still not necessarily reading, because I still don't know if this is going to work for me, right? But we're talking about patriotism and America, indifference. We have some other countries. We see war. We see this question of enormous smiles, whatever that's about. Like, okay, if we're thinking about American patriotism, but also indifference, we're thinking about other countries somehow, whatever that might mean, that could have something to do with these ideas. And again, I say that because we're not in the student's head. But once you start reading somebody else's ideas, especially if it does have something to do with what you're thinking about, even if you don't know it yet, you're going to have more ideas. It's going to spark something. And if it does at all, then that tells me now I need to start reading some of this. I still don't have to read all of it necessarily, okay? I'm going to go back and I'm going to start with this paragraph that seems to actually be her point. I'm going to read a little bit. And again, you saw how long this was. If I get a third of the way through this article, halfway through this article, and I'm still not getting anything, well, then I might go elsewhere, right? Maybe I was wrong. That'll happen, okay? But with what I know of these and the way this sounds, it sounds like it might be pretty good, actually, this source for this student. But say it doesn't. We'll try one more thing. All right, say that doesn't work. You have a couple things you can do. Number one, you can look through some of these other sources, okay? And again, so, like, this is from JSTOR. You have no reason to know this. This is a database. Like, this is actually scholarly stuff. That could work, but it might be a little above our pay grade right now. This is from PBS, so like that might be a video. I don't know how useful that'll be. You have to watch it, right? You just kind of go through, you see what you can find. Maybe you find something else. Maybe not. At that stage, again, there are two things you can do. Number one, maybe you change your terms a little bit. Maybe you're still interested in this, but the phrasing isn't quite right? You kind of mess with the Google search string itself. The other idea I want to put to you is this. The terms innocence and America, especially how we said again, the idea of America, whatever that is, these are two huge ideas, right? So a lot of people have probably written about them, thought about them. It's going to give you a lot of results that you have to sift through. So we got to get more specific, maybe. So then you would go to the poem, and you try to, with this in the back of your mind, you read back through that poem, you're thinking about these ideas, but you're kind of saying, is there anything more specific in the poem itself that I can tie this idea to, that I can use to limit my search results? And it depends on the poem. It depends on the text. You won't always be able to find it super easily, okay? To me, one of the most specific elements in the poem, and immediately recognizable for most people anyway, is this date. What happened in 1945? Take a minute. What happened in 1945? Kind of a big year. We're talking about the poem Little Boy. 1945 is a big year.
The bombing.
Right. And then what came very, very shortly after those bombings? We ended something. World War II. Yeah. 1945 is a big year. It's pretty important. Okay. And it comes up in the poem. So I know, even if it's not important somehow to most people, in the poem it is. We mention it specifically, the year 1945. So I tried it, just to see, right? And again, first of all, it's Google. So you got to kind of sift through some bullshit. We got some Amazon stuff. They're trying to sell you books. And these could be great books. I have no idea. But that's not what we're doing, okay? So you go past that. We have some like Czechoslovakian thing. And again, I'm not hating on the Czechs. That could be great. But we're not doing that, okay? We're just not. We're down here. This is a little more on our level. We have two newspaper articles, one from the Baltimore Sun, one from the Washington Post, both from the 90s, that kind of sound like they're talking about, on the one hand, maybe our ideas in some way, but also definitely the subject matter. Check this out. So I opened both. We're only going to look at one. This first one, long title. War's eruption brought an end of innocence for two nations. Attack on Pearl Harbor forever changed Japan and the United States. Okay, so there's a lot to digest there. But again, number one, it's absolutely talking about the subject matter we're talking about. Japan, U.S., war. Little boy's looking at that. Okay, so that we're good there. Number two, not all titles will do this, but this one does, and it's super helpful. You know, in some ways, what this article is arguing, is trying to convince you of, right? It's somehow suggesting that both countries, Japan and the U.S., as a result of World War II, lost their innocence, whatever that means. And that might be, it's kind of a weird idea for a country, maybe, right, to like lose its innocence. But let's think about it for a second. One of them, I think, well, now we'll start small first. The poem Little Boy, we all agree, is about lost innocence, right? The little boy grows up. You kind of see his adult perspective by the end with the sun exploding, fields turning to rot, like all this dark imagery at the end, right? He loses his innocence. Okay. How else can you lose your innocence, do you think? Like, how would you describe that? What do you have to do? Grow up, yeah. But what does that entail? Like, I don't know if you guys know who the Dalai Lama is. Old man, the spiritual leader of Buddhism. He seems like a pretty innocent guy. Like he almost seems like he like plays with butterflies all day and shit. Like he's. So what do you have to do to lose your innocence? What does that mean? What does that look like?
Must be traumatized.
Being
traumatized.
Okay, maybe. Do you think engaging with like some kind of knowledge, like detrimental, not damaging knowledge? Maybe so. Yeah. What you got back there?
I was gonna say it'd be something unexpected.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I feel like usually innocence people just expect like the same thing from you, and then like doing unexpected things could change their view on the innocence of you.
Well, I think we get a little more specific because like my boys surprise me all the time. They're still plenty innocent, right? But I have a dark sense of humor, and I apologize. But if one of my sons walked in with like a severed goat's head, I know, right? I kind of feel like innocence has been lost. Why? What about, use a different example if you like, by the way. But what about that? What's a loss of innocence there? What has occurred, do you think?
You feel something?
Yeah, he's damaged something else. In this case, he's taken a life pretty horrifically. We gotta see somebody, right? But like, it's not just unexpected, you know? It's darker. It's engaging in certain behaviors that we read as possibly traumatic or again damaging. but just not of that world of innocence where you don't know the world and its darkness. Yes, ma'am?
Kind of like going against our morals.
In a way, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in a way. Okay. So that's, again, this super sort of nebulous definition we have of innocence and the losing of it. Now, why do I bring that up? Again, we said the boy loses his, and we understand that. No one, hopefully, is going to write me a paper about little boy that's just like, he loses his innocence. It's like, I know that. We know that. This guy says in the title, Pearl Harbor changed forever Japan, the U.S. People lose innocence as a result of the war. Well, let's start with Japan. That's not really what we're so much talking about in the poem, I don't think. But just to make sure we understand what he's saying, even without reading it, how do you imagine this guy is probably going to argue Japan lost its innocence as a result of World War II? What did they do? Oh, come on now. You guys had social studies or history, or you've seen movies. What did Japan do to lose their innocence as a country in World War II? What did they do? Might it be included in this huge title? Surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. You know, we weren't at war with them at the time. They just showed up and killed a bunch of people. Now, in Japan's defense, most historians have agreed that we would have been at war with them at some point. Whether or not that's true, it probably is. Surprise attack is kind of fucked up, right? It's a surprise because you're not at war with those people. That's not unlike you walking up and sucker punching somebody. Messed up. So he's probably arguing in some ways anyway. And Japan, by the way, did a lot of other screwed up stuff, so like China specifically. But we're not going to talk about that. But you could say they as a country, maybe the idea of Japan, whatever it was for those people or people around the world when they think of that country, lost their innocence in some way, okay? Now on the flip side, he also claims, here in the title, seems like, that the U.S. did as well. Now my question for you, given what we've talked about, both in this class but also in the poem, could you maybe theorize why he thinks the U.S. lost its innocence too? What was it? Huh? Yeah. I mean, we went to war, but I don't think most people would. Somebody shows up and bombs you, you defend yourself. I mean, What's the poem about? What are they worried about in the poem?
The bombing of Japan.
2 atomic bombs. Why? Because again, on the one hand, that's part of war. That's how that works. You do stuff like that. But why specifically? Again, we're going all the way back to the poem itself. The boy asks his father about it. The father seems very bothered. So it's possible, if not incredibly likely, that the questions this guy's trying to raise are also raised in the father's mind when his son asks him, right? So what about dropping those bombs on those countries, or on those cities, on those people, could work as a kind of loss of innocence for the idea of America? What about that? Do you imagine? And again, I say all this without reading the article. You could read the article. It'll probably tell you. What about that might be some kind of a loss of innocence? Do you think? Yeah. Well, and there have been bombing raids and stuff like that, but they definitely weren't expecting that. That's fair. Okay. Might it have something to do with the bombs themselves as well.
I mean,
Yes, ma'am.
bombs desecrated like the entire land
Demolish the cities.
and killed so many people.
Tens of thousands of people each one, right? And I'm not going to go too far into this, but like it's a rabbit hole you want to be careful about. The emperor of Japan at the time, in telling his people to basically stand down, said that the U.S. had deployed cruel bombs. He called them cruel bombs, because they didn't just totally destroy the cities, right? And you've seen like videos of like tests and stuff. It's intense. Didn't just kill a bunch of people. There's after effects too. We're talking about severe radiation for years and years and years. People still have cancer like pop up as a result of this stuff, right? So in some ways, it's like a totally new technology that brings with it all kinds of new issues. And we as a country, and I think you could easily make the argument now, the father is having to grapple with this, drop those bombs on those two towns in Japan to bring back the boy's question. So what does this look like for you if you're the student on the other end of this? Well, you do that search and you mess around, and maybe you get to the point we looked up Innocence in America, 1945. That's all we did, right? And we scrolled through some Amazon crap, okay? And then we got to a couple just articles from newspapers. We didn't even read it. We just read the title. And I had you guys think about it some. And we get what this guy's arguing. Now my question is, I'm not saying it is necessarily, you have to go back and really look, but might the poem, Little Boy, be making this same kind of case? That America, when we dropped those bombs, as a country, as an idea, lost its innocence, whatever that means. I think you could. I think you could start to, right? That's what you do for homework. That's what the source discussion is, right? I know this took, what time is it? This took like half an hour. And I know for some of you it felt like a lot longer. A half an hour is not that much time, man. Be knocking out one of your homework assignments. And again, especially if you really get running with something like this is a cool idea. That I think the student had it the whole time. I want to make that clear. It's not spelled out at all. Because that's how thoughts work most of the time, especially for you guys. But if you engage with other people's ideas, one of two things is going to happen. Number one, you're going to agree. You're going to end up reading the article and be like, oh shit, that's what I was thinking the whole time. Some people will tell you you've simply stolen that person's ideas, which is possible. But I'm of a mind, because we went and sought this out, right? What is more likely is that this person, this is a professional writer, whoever they are, okay? That's their job. So they have language that you just don't have kicking around all the time. But when you go and engage with their ideas, especially if it was something kind of back here to begin with, you're picking up on that language. That's giving you ammunition to express yourself. So yes, you're agreeing with them, but I do not think, for the most part, you're stealing their ideas. You're simply kind of looking at them and be like, that's what was back here. I just didn't realize it. Awesome. You go write about that. That's your homework. Great. Another thing can happen. You can disagree. I don't think this student would, by the way, just with what we have, the whole Leave It to Beaver thing. That's like innocent, right? And then it makes too much sense, even though I'm not in that person's head. But say they read this and they disagreed completely somehow. It could happen. It's 2020. You guys grew up on the internet, okay? For the most part. Like I remember when they installed dial-up in our house. Like I grew up a little differently. In my day, when somebody called the house, it would kick you offline. Could you imagine? But anyway, when I read a thing that I disagree with, I immediately know what I think. You know what I'm saying? Somebody, especially somebody posts something on Twitter or whatever the cool kids are doing these days. You're like, you're an idiot. Here's why. You immediately know, to some extent, what you think. Same thing can happen here. So worst case scenario, you have an idea about a poem, you're not quite sure. You find an article that sounds like it has something to do with what you're thinking, and you read it. And by the end, you're like, oh, that guy's a fucking moron. You know why you think that. You write about that. I'm not saying don't call him a fucking moron, dress it up a little bit, but talk about why in your poem, whatever it might be, I found this article. This person had this to say, and this is what they thought. But given what happens in the poem, I'm looking at this line, maybe this other line, it's actually this. That's not the case at all. Right? That's fine too. You still figured out, by using another source, what it is you thought. I'm fine with either one. Does that make sense? Okay. Questions about any of that? Okay. I feel like I left something out that's really eating at me, but it's not going to come to me. All right. What I want to do now is, some of these are way stronger than others. That one's really strong. So if I ever let go and it's going to be real loud. I just want you guys to know. It's not intentional. All right. I like to be transparent with you guys. It's just my style. So I'll have to start this next part this way. This did not go well in my first class. So I have to start with a question. I want you to answer honestly, and to promote that honesty, I'm going to not look, all right? My eyes are closed, okay? I just want to show of hands. How many people read the poem Body and Soul? I'm not going to know who you are, okay? I just need hands. How many people read the poem? How many is that? I heard somebody laugh, so that doesn't bode well. All right, you put it down. Oh my God. That honestly wounds me a little bit. The really troubling part, and I can't know this for sure, because again, whenever I tell you I'm not looking, I'm not going to trick you. And I know one person in the class is an SI. I kind of worry it was her. But I don't know. God forbid she didn't. Then it's like, come on. But, Jesus, guys. Okay. All right. Man, here's the other thing. I had to give my last class a speech. I'm going to have to give it to you, too. And I feel like a D-bag, because I meant it to my first class. I honestly did. I'm going to have to bring it for you guys, too, but I feel like a tool because I just said all this. You know what I'm saying? Putting me in a weird spot. Don't worry about it. All right. So here's where we're at. I'm going to tell you what I wanted to do, and I'm going to walk you through it to the best of my ability, given that we haven't read the text. And then we'll probably leave. Because we can't do it without having read. What I wanted to do, and here's the best part. It could have been totally crap anyway, because what I wanted to do, I wanted to group you up to begin with. I would assume you guys already see the issue with that, right? But I thought, well, we can split the room in half. You guys just kind of talk to each other. Not super loud, but it could work, right? You guys do the same. I think we could do it. We'll find out later. But what I thought was this. There's two ways to approach the kind of research we talked about, okay? The first is this, and I think this is the primary mode you will be in. What themes, what big ideas present themselves to you? I want you to either just do that on your own, think about one of the poems you're interested in for some reason, and try to pick some of these out. And or you can mine your homework. If you turn in that homework, chances are good, they're not 100%, but they're good. You got at least one or two of these kicking around. Go find them. Then go look them up, right? Go do your best to do what we did. That's one way to do it, okay? The other way is what we were going to do, and it's this. Especially when you're reading these poems, okay? Because again, they were published in the 90s. They're mostly about people from the 50s or whatever, give or take. So it's about a whole other place and time that we are just not familiar with, I would wager. As a result of that, there's going to be certain elements that you do not understand. For instance, and this isn't really giving anything away, but in the poem that you should have read, this comes up a couple times. I'm doing my best to spell it. I think that's right, but that's how far outside my own experience that thing is. I'm not sure I'm spelling it correctly. All is Chalmers. Now what that is farm equipment. Specifically, I think it's like a tractor or something in the poem. Does that matter? Not always. But I'll put it to you this way. When you're reading, for instance, these poems, I'm sure it's happened already. You've read one or two things and you just kind of went right by them. I don't know what that is. Ullman playing basketball. Several of you, I imagine, had no idea, still probably don't, what a pick and roll is. Okay? And that's fine. You don't necessarily need to know that. But the second thing you can do, okay, especially if you try this and it's not working for you for some reason, the second thing you can do, if you have just a short list of things I didn't know what the hell they were in the poem we read, go look those up. You never know. So for instance, a pick and roll is a play in basketball. I'm not going to walk you through it. You could easily find a thing online if you need to. But that might help you. The way that that play works could be significant, potentially. It's about bodies moving around each other. It's kind of, we talked about the poem. Maybe, right? Same thing with this. It's a fucking tractor. May not matter. We're reading poems about people who work on farms. Tractors are around. That's how farms work. But one thing happens in the poem, and it happens twice, I think. I think it's twice. A lot of the poem, Body and Soul, is about a baseball game, right? And somebody hits a home run past this Aldous Chalmers. On the one hand, it doesn't sound like anything. He hit a home run past a tractor, fine. But, especially when you read the poem, you think about some of the other things going on. I'm going to give you one minor spoiler, it won't ruin anything. I think a big part of Body and Soul has something to do with, the speaker says as much, the disappointment that the characters have to face because they realize that there's certain parts of the world, there's certain things they'll never have. They'll never even have access to them. It's just impossible. They can't touch it, whatever that is, okay? Now, given that information, the home run that sails over this tractor could be a kind of a metaphor, right? It goes outside the bounds of the life that these guys lead. It goes past wherever they're allowed to go. They're never going to get past that tractor. But this home run and what it is in the poem does. So it's, again, part of what they have to face, what they can never be. I would never have access to that if I had not looked up this. Because I have no reason to know what that is otherwise, right? So that's another avenue you can go down. You may be stymied here. That can happen. As you're reading, and this is just good practice, especially, I say no shade, there's a little bit of shade. For a 3-page poem that you had a week to read, guys, it's 3 pages. If you have just something next to you as you read, I don't know what that is, I don't know what that is, write it down. Keep it moving, because you got to read the thing, keep it moving. But after you're done, look some of those up. What is that? I don't know. Google. Oh, it's a tractor. Okay, maybe that matters for me later. As it turns out, I just started an argument about that fucking tractor. So that's the other direction you can head, okay? There's going to be elements in different poems that you don't know what they are. Look into them. On a similar note, some of you may know a lot about farm equipment. Maybe you always knew what that was. Maybe you understood the poem completely. But if certain elements stand out as significant, such as this, and you just knew what it was. Write that down too. Write down anything that seems like more might be going on, whether you know about it or not. That's the second avenue you could go down. You just look. There's a famous person in Body and Soul who basically none of you know who that is. Look him up on Wikipedia. See what these guys would have known about him, because they would have known who he was. Given what they would have known, does that change how you read the poem now, how you understand it? It probably does. You could do that for the homework. That's the other way to do it. Okay?